Hello, and welcome to myfinancesteacher.org. We haven't had a look at cryptocurrencies for a while, so let's have a look at Bitcoin today. I want to start with a weekly chart, looking at the longer term view. Looks like Bitcoin over the last few years actually has been forming this very large triangle. It looks more or less of a symmetrical triangle. Symmetrical triangles usually are a continuation pattern, meaning that as Bitcoin was in an uptrend before it entered into this triangle, there is a good chance that this uptrend is going to continue possibly over the next several months to the next year or so. And the interesting part about this chart is that over the last couple of months, it looks like Bitcoin is breaking out of this triangle. And a month ago or so, we actually even have seen a retest of the breakout. And so far, it seems that the retest is relatively successful. Looking at the 14-week RSI, yes, a couple of months ago, the 14-week RSI has reached into overbought area, but since then it's cooled down to around 55, 56. And I think there is still strength in Bitcoin to push a little bit higher and make this 14-week RSI actually poke into that overbought area. So based on the performance of Bitcoin over the last couple of months, and particularly based on the successful retest of the breakout, I would say there is probably a 70% chance that over the next several months, we're generally going to see higher prices on Bitcoin. And there is also a good chance we're going to see a new high above $14,000 compared to the high back in the middle of 2019. Of course, in the alternative scenario, there is also a chance that Bitcoin breaks back down below this upward trend line of that large triangle to retest possibly some of the recent support zones or the lower trend line of this triangle. I wouldn't give it a large percentage though, maybe something like a 30% chance of a breakdown. So if we do see Bitcoin, say, below around $10,000, then some of the support zones to retest for Bitcoin would be around $8,400. That's one of the recent lows in the middle of May. And if that support zone is broken, then maybe Bitcoin will retest that lower trend line of this large triangle. I don't think this scenario is very likely though. If this scenario is to happen, then one would see some sort of a head and shoulders formation playing out with a breakdown. Even with this pattern seemingly playing out on the chart so far, I don't think this scenario of significantly lower Bitcoin prices over the next couple of months is very likely. Instead, I think the longer term chart is pretty bullish. Next, moving on to the daily chart, we see that the Bollinger Bands are narrowing. The ongoing 2-month cycle in Bitcoin is already 27 days old. So we are kind of approaching the midpoint of the ongoing cycle. Nevertheless, I still think there is a good chance for stronger Bitcoin prices, as if you look at history and compare the tops of each of those cycles over the last year and even longer, very few of them actually top below the blue line of the 50-day moving average. The last time the top was below the 50-day moving average was down in early 2019 after a very significant drop in Bitcoin, all the way from $6,000 to $3,000. So as you see, most of the cycles top at least above the 50-day moving average. And with Bollinger Bands narrowing, I think there is a good chance of volatility coming. And given that the cycle so far is only 27 days old, this volatility is more likely on the upside. Talking about volatility, over the last few weeks, we haven't actually had much volatility. So let's have a look at this chart. This chart shows the days where Bitcoin price changed by more than 2%, either down or up. And as you see, over the last few weeks, we haven't really had any changes in Bitcoin prices of over 2%. And naturally, the periods of very low volatility are replaced by periods of higher volatility and vice versa. So the darker areas on the chart are periods with higher volatility. Lighter areas on the chart are periods with low volatility. We haven't had volatility for quite a while, so sometime soon I would expect relatively high volatility, and the likelihood of upside volatility is, I think, pretty good. This is a volatility chart for 2020. Similar thing can be observed in other years. In 2019, for example, periods of low volatility are replaced with periods of higher volatility and vice versa. Coming back to the daily chart, as I said, Bollinger Bands are narrowing. Possible break above the 50-day moving average over the next few weeks might finally bring the 14-day RSI closer to overbought. So far in this cycle, the highest that 14-day RSI came to was only 54.8 back in the middle of September. I don't think it's high enough for the cycle top, and that's another reason why I'm still positive on Bitcoin price, even in the short term over the next couple of weeks. Now moving into 4-hour chart, we see another triangle here that I've mentioned in one of my recent posts on Bitcoin, and this one is a little bit more mixed. In early October, the lower trend line of this triangle was tested again by Bitcoin, and I think Bitcoin is on the way to test the upper trend line. So possibly over the next 1 or 2 days, slightly higher prices and a likely retest of the lower prices again down at about $10,500 before that break above the 50-day moving average. Next, let's have a look at Fear and Greed Index in Bitcoin. At the moment, it's at 42, and back in early September, it reached as low as around 38. From this chart, you see that usually a good buying opportunity is when this Fear and Greed Index is somewhere below 30. If it's closer to 20, that's even better. But it's not every time that it reaches that low. So possibly early in September, 37, 38 was the best that the chart was giving us for this cycle. And also, as you see from history, a good selling opportunity is when this Fear and Greed Index is somewhere above 70. And even back in the middle of September with this spike in Fear and Greed Index, the index was still pretty low at somewhere about 52. So that's another reason I think the cycle still has a good potential over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Next, moving on to the Bitcoin Optimism Index. Again, generally a good buying opportunity when the markets are pessimistic about an asset. So a good buying opportunity is when this Optimism Index is pretty low, close to this green line. And the selling opportunity is when everybody is excited about the markets, when the optimism is close to this red line. Over the last year and a half or so, there have only been 2 cycles that topped with the optimism index pretty far from that red line. That was in September last year and in summer this year. So the majority of cycles top with relatively high optimism level, and in the ongoing cycle, we still haven't seen this optimism index come close to the red line. We've seen a nice buying opportunity in early September, and I still think we're going to see a nicer top to this cycle over the next few weeks. Next, let's have a look at premiums on Bitcoin price according to GBTC Crypto Fund. As you see at the moment, the premiums are at about 8%. And historically, with premiums below, say, this line of 15%, we see a relatively good buying opportunity in Bitcoin. So generally over the medium term, this also tells me that we probably are going to see stronger prices over the next few weeks to the next several months. And lastly, let's have a look at market depth ratio on Bitcoin. Market depth ratio is the ratio of buy orders versus sell orders on a range of cryptocurrency exchanges. And generally, when there are more buy orders than sell orders, this ratio is positive. And also, if there are more buy orders than sell orders, meaning that there is greater demand rather than supply, the price is likely to go up. As we see with these green candles, whenever the market depth ratio is positive, that usually shows a good opportunity to buy Bitcoin, as it was back in late 2019, in March this year, sometime in late June, early July this year, and in early September. At the moment, though, the market depth ratio is pretty negative, and maybe that shows the opportunity for Bitcoin to come down to the lower trend line of this triangle on the 4-hour chart. As that happens, let's say over the next several days, there is a good chance that market depth ratio might flip into positive, giving us another nice buying opportunity. That's all from me for now. In the comments, let me know if we can see $12,000 on Bitcoin over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And of course, good luck in your trades.